I'm
We
gonna
all wish you the best there.
definitely, Carolyn. Um, I just started the recording, but we can absolutely chat about that more. I mean, we can chat about anything that people want to bring up. And I'm sure it's hard to focus on other things when that's happening near you, Carolyn. Um, so yeah, we can definitely talk about that. And then since I just started the recording, I'll say again, today the 2024 climate literacy guide was released. So I just wanted to give people the opportunity to give initial reactions and chat about it a little bit. We're still kind of digging into it ourselves. And Patrick has spent an insane amount of time working on the new pages on the CLEAN website, and aligning all the new principles with some of our resources and educator guides and all of that. So um, we're still wrapping our heads around it, but it is very exciting. And I'll just start by saying one thing that we really had to think about, and I think we even talked about it a little bit on the clean call, was, what's going to happen with the old climate literacy principles. And if you've had the chance to look at both of them so far, you'll notice that what's different about the new climate literacy principles is that they are very, very focused on equity and justice and action, which is great. Um, Whereas the old principles are very focused on the science, and both have their merit. So, one thing that we're all trying to do in terms of branding is kind of acknowledging that difference. And for clean, at least, we're going to be referring to the old climate literacy principles. Let me pull up the email. So the old the old climate literacy principles will are officially going to be called the essential principles of climate science, the essential principles of climate science, whereas the new ones will be called the essential principles of addressing climate change. So one is addressing climate change, one is climate science. Um,
And
and
that's the
clean,
language in the documents too, just so everybody's aware.
yeah. Clean will, we've decided to keep the essential principles of climate science available on our website. So that's not going away. Just because that information is still really valuable. And while still acknowledging that there are gaps from it, and the addressing climate change is important as well. So I just wanted to say that. And I don't know if I can open the floor up to anyone who has thoughts or questions or initial reactions to all of it.
I'll jump in and say that in building the new educator guide and pages, it was really cool to see how much work we had done in this realm already. With the climate mental health pages, we had a lot on justice and systems action we were able to include. With a project I did using a lot of clean resources with the Right Here, Right Now Climate Conference and Educators Workshop. We focused on climate change and human rights, impacts, obligations, and solutions. So there was a lot I was able to pull from there. And between those two resources that really address this new realm of action and justice and agency, we were also able to pull from the old principles to honor the science parts of the new principles, which have a lot of similar content in that realm, but it's less of the overall focus, as Gina mentioned. But it was just cool to see how much work we have done in the last few years that already aligns. So I thought I'd put that out there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say it's very similar to what Patrick, I was going to say almost the same thing. you looked at it more in terms of the actual content we put together, but I will say that, yeah, the more I've dug into, like, my first glance at the literacy principles, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, these are so different and so much less science and so much more, on the justice and action, which is good. But as I've dug in more, I've noticed it's been rearranged a little bit. And I think Frank talked about this too. I think there is still more focus on justice and action. I think it has been a little less focus on the science side, but I also think that a lot of the concepts were sort of just rearranged in different ways. And so instead of the guiding principle being more of the like humans can do stuff about climate change and solutions piece, that's interwoven in and a little bit highlighted in its own principle now and stuff like that. So yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, Patrick. I feel like it reflects well the update in the field that we've seen over the last 15 years and the work we've been doing the last few years. And we've been noticing too that, it looks different and has been rearranged, but there is still the basis is a lot of the same as what the old principles were too.
I would just add that this is it's because of the fact that, you look at I already printed this off like an hour ago, but then if you look at the back page or the last page of the PDF, it's like there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 government agency logos on the back of it. And to have such a document that allows us to say, like, this is important, and the government even says it's important. It's just affirming and in a humongous way that gives credibility to the work that we do in all the different places that we work, in all our different spheres of influence. And it's stuff that many of us are already doing and have been doing for years, and have content that we know is like so important. And yet now to have this long awaited tool to just back us up as individual professionals, as well as organizations and agencies, it just feels good. And that says it lightly. I don't know how else, there's better words for that probably, but to know that the work we're doing is affirmed by the US government, and we know that, but when it's questioned, there's been so much for years, so much there's the narratives that we are holding on to or have been holding on to collectively are not very helpful, and this helps us change the narrative in a way that's really real and guided by pragmatic stuff, as opposed to our hearts and emotions and what we know is right.
Yeah, it's funny. It feels a little bit like a double-edged sword, because I know that because there were so many people involved, I just think back to Frank saying a few different times that it was really hard to get things approved and pushed forward because there were so many cooks in the kitchen, but it does make it even more of an accomplishment at the end of the day, now that it is live, that there were so many people to agree on, this being so important and kind of like, yeah, our guiding star for what we do. Yeah. Other thoughts? Patrick,
I
if
haven't
you
had a lot of time to go through it yet. I was peeking through it in my last meeting when I saw the announcement. But it does seem like a lot of the science is now like in links. So to kind of say that it's not there, I mean, maybe we just kind of push on, like, there are a lot of links about like, how do we know this in the climate like basics part, that I think before it was trying to like include all of that. And I would say in a way it makes sense. Like, we've learned more. You can't put it all in there. And so you kind of just summarize and then link to things, which makes a lot of sense to me. And I love the like focus on what is the United Nations doing and what are different groups doing. And so it does lend this. I know at NCSE, there's been this fear of being seen as, even using the word action sometimes can be like, oh, you can't do that. Right. But this makes it clearer that like action is part of climate literacy and that the science all still really matters. And like you can link to kind of like what the scientists know and then focus on what are we doing about it.
Love that. I feel like um, it kind of feels like a response to, and it complements the new NCA too. I'm thinking about how, we've had a lot of discussions about the new, NCA 5 and how, that really focuses on the state of the climate in this country. And I know some people have a hard time with that because I know that the authors of that try really hard to stay within their scope and not talk about like, okay, so here's what to do next. They're not prescribing anything. They're just saying this is what's happening. And this feels like a nice complement to that, since it's, really leans heavily into the addressing climate change language, where we're acknowledging that it exists. We've seen the impacts, and I think one of the principles even is, talking about how humans um, can have positive impacts, and it feels like by the last principle, everything is really summarized nicely. So, yeah. Yeah, Sarah, that's a really good point.
Well, I know there was a petition going around to like get everybody to sign to say, hey, NCA, National Climate Assessment, why is there not an education chapter? And that was in
Yeah.
May. So I don't know what the outcome of that is. Does anybody know? Or
I don't know.
I don't think we will know till the next NCA. Like, I don't think they can change what they've released because it has to go through all the government feedback mechanisms and things like that. But then I think the idea was to try to get that effort for the next assessment, which they start like now.
I was
They
gonna
start
say they were
putting some
already
of the author
looking.
teams together.
Yeah, they've
so-
already put our author teams together. And it's interesting, the US Global Change Research Program is the publisher of the literacy document, and they're the people who lead the NCA process. So I think that would be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
And to find out who's asking who for it to be the authors for that education chapter, if there is one. Because a bunch of you should be part of that, as well as all these other great, amazing humans.
Yeah, Scott.
Oh, I'm curious. I really haven't had, time to look at this yet, but I will, I promise. But I'm wondering, how does it generally get released as far as how partners and you guys generally encourage, get people to read this, or what happens? How does it get promoted? How, and what do you hope to get out of promoting it? I guess that's my question.
That is a very good question. I see Patrick is thinking, but I'll just say that so our whole CLEAN's really our whole mission is built around the climate literacy principles and what we do. And I think for us, the climate literacy principles are kind of like the gold standard of how we want people to learn about climate education. So all that we build is around that. And the resources in our collection will be tagged with different principles, and like how are we addressing each principle with different resources. So we do try to be really, really intentional about that with CLEAN, at least. And Patrick can talk more about this, but there's an example of this in the state of Colorado right now, where they're trying to figure out how to incorporate climate change education across the state, and they're trying to figure out like what that even looks like. And this is, I think, just provides a good overview and introduction into how to actually do that, because people who are not familiar with climate change are very overwhelmed by just starting all of this. As an educator, you don't know where to start. So this is a really good foundational piece about how to build your curriculum, and what to say even, and what your learning goals are. Yeah, go ahead, Roberta.
Remember to unmute. Yeah, so two ways that I have seen these the original climate literacy principles used in the last year is the Envirothon. About a year and a half ago was their special topic was about climate change. And one of the resources that they drove students to was climate literacy principles. So it was just, one of those resources. The other thing I'm curious though, I know that the North American Association for Environmental Education has been rolling out their new sort of gold standard on environmental education in climate. And I got to review and edit one of the drafts of these principles for climate education. And they were still referring, of course, to the old climate literacy principles. So I really hope that they change that as they roll the new one out. Which it may have already come out. I can't remember, but it's like
It's
we're
supposed
waiting.
to come out today. It's supposed to come out today, Roberta. That's what Bora told
Really?
me. Yeah.
The NAAE one.
Yeah, I just put
Okay.
a link in the chat box too about
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I
But-
hope that they're
So
driving.
watch for an email from NAAE today is
Good,
what I've been
Good.
told.
Yeah, I'm sure they're connected with CLEAN. But yeah, those are a couple of ways that non-formal environmental educators are using these principles, just driving students, driving teachers to them for the most concise, distilled in essentials about climate ed.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say it's such an interesting and awesome time in this realm, because a lot of things are happening at once that are pretty similar. But I feel like the legislative pushes at the state level have been a bit ahead of the push to get this out. But this provides a ton of support and cover and justification for all of those efforts. When we're looking at what's going on in Washington and New Jersey, California, soon to be Maine, New York, a lot of the states that are leading in climate education are really leaning into teaching climate change across the curriculum. And this document really pulls together the educational backing for doing so to honor systems thinking and a solutions orientation that helps substantiate student agency and helps both teachers and students work through the climate and mental health challenges associated with all these issues that we've been piling on over the past decade or two. So I think it's awesome that we've got all these examples of things that are happening nationally, and now they can say, and we have the backing of all these national organizations and this document that really lends strength to these efforts. And I think it's also a great time for it because those efforts are so new, they're still at risk of floundering. And this gives that backing to say, no, we do need to continue this funding because this is where everything is going. And it helps overcome the risk of a new administration popping into the states that are leading and saying, that was just that administration's little project. And it reorients it into, no, this is the national direction of climate change education. So I think it's a great time for them to come out and really helps lend strength to the movement that's already continuing. So that's what I would respond on the national level, the importance here, and the state level. For the CLEAN side, similarly, the projects that we've been up to have all entered this realm. And without getting into detail, it has stretched us beyond where we started for the climate literacy principles, the essential principles for science literacy. The projects that we've been doing on mental health, on teaching across the curriculum, the way that we've talked about the NCA 5, all of those projects have stretched our scope a little bit, but this new document says, no, actually, that's exactly where our scope should be, because the way that we ground CLEAN is through the NOAA climate literacy principles. That's how we started. That's how we'll continue. And so now we can say those projects are centered in exactly what we should be focused on. They aren't a stretch beyond our scope. It's really an awesome grounding tool. And I'll stop there. I hope that helps address it.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. My question, I mean, you mentioned, some of the states that are really have been in this area for a while and maybe put out some things, and the document will certainly support what they're doing, especially across the curriculum kinds of efforts. My question, when you're looking at a state like Florida, which hasn't done much on a coordinated effort, I mean, how do you approach, how would you encourage the state or leaders here, and this may be a question for Carolyn and Rachel involved, to sort of look at these climate literacy, this document, and think about, well, what can we do in Florida that kind of connects to these kinds of things? I mean, is there a way to elevate it in this state?
I didn't raise my hand, but since you mentioned it, I mean, I don't know that there's really, the thing is, I don't know that there's really any effective strategy with our current administration to advocate at a statewide level for any of this. I mean, they're actively hostile to it. But, going sort of district by district and trying to get them to implement that, I mean, I just, not to make it too political, like vote, hopefully, that's part of what we do is, try to educate folks and get them to consider climate issues when they do make choices at the ballot box, because again, the DeSantis administration is not going to hear anything we have to say. We've sent, we've sent letters signed by thousands of people to Manny Diaz about educational standards in Florida and get polite or not so polite brush offs. So yeah, I think it kind of comes down to picking your battles and waiting for something more opportune to come up, because as it currently stands, I don't see that being an effective strategy, unfortunately.
Actually, I'd like to add to that. Hang on, let me turn my camera on. Sorry, I've been multitasking. Hi guys. Been a busy day. I think, I mean, I definitely agree with what Carolyn is saying in terms of our administration and what can be done from, you know, at this school, public school district perspective. I think that's, and the way I've seen that for years here in Florida is that that's why these special programs are that much more important, like all the things that Cleo is doing, all the things that Pine Dog, and even, you know, FPN, Scott, everything that you do, all of these things are super important in our state, using after school programs, and because the people really aren't blind to what's happening. We absolutely see the effects of these things on a daily basis, whether it's heat or flooding or strong storms, etc. And, you know, they're willing to listen. I just came back from an event where we were just full of folks that wanted to hear what we had to say and want to be involved, want to have more information. So the more special programs that can be implemented outside of the school system, the better off we are, at least within the state of Florida. I think that's the approach. Not so much standing by, which I can, you know, see that too, but I think moving forward or trying to push forward other directions, such as after school and special programs.
Yeah, no, I do think that's really helpful. I didn't necessarily mean stand by and do nothing, but on when it said when it comes to the actual governorship, yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I think that
Well, unfortunately, I don't know if any of that's going to change anytime soon. So, I mean, you've been here
That's
long enough. You kind of see the direction the state has gone, even in the last 20 years.
true, but I
So you just do the best you can.
true, and I just got back from Jacksonville, Duval County, which is a very conservative area. But they had this event honoring a community organizer and like social justice crusader from formerly enslaved Black woman from back in like the 1920s. And it's all of these folks working in like agriculture, a lot of them who are very interested. So yeah, they do like, and they do a lot of youth education as part of that. So yeah, informal education, in addition, yeah, with these special programs, I'm with Rachel on that one. They can be very effective and super impactful, even if you are kind of shut out of the more formal channels. Wait, there's all
Out of
this
curiosity. Oh, go
inroads.
for it.
I was just gonna say that's interesting. That's not, there's sometimes random inroads that you wouldn't expect, and then you kind of happen upon these little bubbles of people that are unique, and you're like, oh wow, that's cool. Sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
Oh, not at all. I was just going to say, I hope that even though it's not going to change the state political situation or move the needle there, that maybe this resource will help you leverage funding opportunities with the justification provided there in order to continue that good work that y'all are doing.
And I would add, I wonder, and I'm curious about the possibility of I think the answer to this is yes, but it's always possible. Like this is a tool and a resource to really build, to rally around as professional colleagues and to be like celebratory but also like have the shared language. And so when Carolyn feels so isolated in the good old state of Florida at times, but Cleo Institute is awesome. I talk about it often. I'm like, even Florida has a program that's awesome. and when I say that, I'm like, because Colorado, we don't have a state organization necessarily. We have, CLEAN is in, Patrick's here in Colorado, but works nationally. But I talk about Florida having a great organization in spite of all of the other things. So I think other people are also saying similar things about your work. And so to not get too lost in the terrible, hard, horrible, like things that make us go crazy and are wrong in a lot of ways, but to remember that we are all part of this professional community that are so behind this work, even if we're thousands of miles apart. And just remember that, like, this work takes so much personal energy beyond our organizational, transactional ways of being in the world. And just remember personally, and that we are more connected because of tools like this that give us shared language and goals and values so that we can we stand. I mean, this is a PDF full of values in a lot of ways. So
Yeah, I guess that begs the question.
Celebrate that and know you're part of, we all should celebrate that.
And it begs the question, we probably should invite all, Patrick or whoever the CLEAN representative is to one of our FCAN presentations, to actually talk about the document and how we might connect teachers more to this. So we'll be in touch about that if you're interested.
And if folks are going to be at NAAE conference in Pittsburgh, there's a bunch of us that'll be there. So let's all, lean on each other. And yeah, just don't forget to be celebratory and like connected personally, I guess is what
I'll be at NAAE and I'm hoping to plan another little CLEAN get together in person. So, and Patrick and I are doing a climate mental health session. So we should all, support each other there.
And to reinforce what Sarah said too, it's like the last time the climate literacy principles were published in 2009, it spurred the beginnings of CLEAN. So, thinking about what these types of documents can do to create those national partnerships, to create shared vision, shared support, shared languaging, and bring folks together, we're largely here because of the last one. So it's exciting to consider the possibilities of what can emerge from this one, or how we can transform, continue, and grow the great work that was started in the last decade and a half plus.
Yeah, this is a really big deal. So it should definitely be a party at every professional meeting you go to for the next year. I mean, it's a really big deal. It's not just about the 12 people on this call I know we know that, but it's a really big deal.
I was just gonna say, Patrick, to follow up on what you were saying, is we've used that climate literacy document as one of our reading resources for our classes. And of course, we're gonna be adding this to future classes. So continuing with that conversation.
And I'm so happy to let our conversation move forward organically and address the exciting points of this. Let's keep doing that if we are situated here. Also, I can take 5 minutes and give you a quick overview of the comparison between the two sets, if helpful.
I think that would be good. Yeah.
I don't want to stop momentum. It's a good conversation we've been buzzing along. But okay. I'll pause a minute before I switch over to that mode for anybody who wants to continue current conversations threads or add something in those realms. Okay, do this. So looking at the last set of climate literacy principles, the essential principles of climate science, as they are noted. I've been looking at these a lot as has Sarah, as have other people in Colorado, because the current Colorado Climate Literacy Seal, which is a diploma endorsement, is largely based on these. And so we've been playing with these a lot. And the way that I have talked about them and understand them, if you take a look at the first 4 things here, you see the sun, where the energy is coming from. Once it gets here, it's messy. Life on Earth impacts and is impacted by it. And then it has systematic variation. We understand all that because we can do modeling and observation. From that modeling and observation, we know we're creating impact. We know that impact is consequential. So that's the quick overview of this original set. And in talking to Frank and learning a little bit more about the compromises that were made to create this set, originally there was more of this guiding principle for informed climate decisions woven in throughout, but the political compromise was to take it out, set it here as this principle, and say that this principle should be woven in through these 7, but it made it easier to pass it through the ranks by setting it aside and saying it's another thing instead of it's everything. But it's interesting to reflect at this moment that how that happened, and that I think that there was a lot of desire to, even in this document, lean more towards the direction of the current document. So that's a quick overview of the past principles. And it's pretty solid because it outlines the climate system. It looks at how we know what we know, and then it looks at impacts and actions. And really what is happening in the new principles is we're collapsing the first 4 to some degree, and expanding on the next set while actually doing that weaving process of this action and pathways to action and ways to accomplish mitigation and adaptation throughout. So hold that in mind for a second. The new principles have a lot of crosswalking between the old ones, but they do some really cool and important things that are different. So interestingly, this right here, number 1, is very similar to the old number 5. We can understand the system through observation and modeling. And it's interesting that they started with that and put it forward and said, hey, we know what we're talking about because we can do these things. Now let's talk about the things we know, instead of all the things, and we really know them, we promise. So that was an interesting switch. This greenhouse gas shapes Earth climate has a lot of similarities with the principle in the original set that was looking at complex interactions among components. But by phrasing it in this way, they really called out directly, instead of complex interactions, they said, no, greenhouse gas is the complex interaction that's the issue. And they highlighted that and pulled that out more directly. So that's pretty cool. This number 3 corresponds somewhat to the number 6 in the previous set that says humans are having an impact and we know it. And this number 4 here really looks kind of at that consequences, which is closer to number 7 in the previous set. Now we get into some interesting territory, though, because this justice is possible if climate actions are equitable is like an awesome thing to throw in the mix. Then they got it through and really leaning into justice. So for this one, I based a lot of the teaching guidance on our climate mental health justice pages. And it is new and novel, though it weaves in some of the actions and solutions with this framing, which is an awesome framing. And then this is the adaptation solution and the adaptation principle. Something they've done here is they separated adaptation and mitigation. 6 is adaptation, 7 is mitigation. And I think they did that to highlight the fact that we have to start with some of the adaptations now. We can't just be like, we could do this or we could do that. It's like, no. We need to do adaptation, we need to do mitigation. And this somewhat parallels the construction in the NCA 5 of the new adaptation and mitigation chapters. And writers from that contributed to this. So while this has some parallels to the old set, I think separating them out and calling them both out is really important. And then this one here, number 8, takes it all and kind of says, in order to do this in the time and ways we need to, we need really strong systems action. So it can't be pieces and parts. We have to put it all together in order to create this transformational change. So you can kind of think of it as these last 4 really go places and do things that the last set did not. And the first 4 include different framings and highlights of the last set. And I'll stop there. Please jump in with thoughts, questions, considerations.
I just want to thank you for summarizing that. That's super helpful to just kind of, because I didn't even know they were out today. So it's just really lovely to kind of see the compare and contrast. And while you were talking, I got an email from the Kentucky Climate Consortium, and they were announcing this very thing. So it's very cool.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. There are connections there that I didn't even realize, so that's helpful. Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Gina. I'm not sure if we have the answer to this, but if people do have parts of this, definitely want to hear this over the coming weeks, of ways in which the various federal agencies that have, that are part of this or down at the bottom, ways in which each program is saying, okay, with this, we are going to do this, or this is how we're going to be spreading this out through other parts of our agencies and things. Mobile Climate Science Labs works with 2 agencies on a regular basis in the informal education realm, NASA and Smithsonian. I mean, we already know some of the things that are going on here, but you see, what do we see that's going to change? What do we see that might be extra work that the different agencies are going to be doing in this field? That's one. And 2 is a similar one of, do we see that more is coming? This is the big announcement. They want people to read it and to study it and things. Okay, now there is implementation money and implementation programs that are coming. Those get announced a little bit later. But things that would be that teachers and students would really notice as, okay, there's support, there's recognition for those that have already been doing this for years, right? That what are the teachers who have been doing this for years being recognized or supported or feeling there's a change, and the students feeling, wow, this, when we talk about the work to make climate literacy, it's not just educators, it's students. They have to learn, they teach others and so on. So there's the thing of, looking at after this is being released, what are we seeing that's coming out in the implementation phase on that one? Those are just ones I'm curious about. Thank you.
I'm curious too. I don't know how much of that picture we have at this moment. And I'm not sure what's in the works. But this grounds that question well and pushes it to the forefront. I definitely agree with the question.
Fair point. I think we all are anxious to see how this unfolds and hoping that the affirmation, like Sarah said, from all of these government agencies means that there'll be a broader impact. And yeah, it's just good to see everyone excited about something, honestly. Go ahead, Scott.
Was there any pushback on any of the social kind of the Final Four thing that you highlighted as some of the differences between this one and the last one? I'm just curious if there are any particular agencies that push back, or what were their concerns about those four?
I don't know which agencies, but I do know that Frank said it was really hard having that language in there to get it passed. I don't know which agency specifically, but I think that having that language is part of the reason why it took a lot longer than we originally thought it would take to get these. It's because it just had to be there was a lot of back and forth and justifications, and there was a lot around it. So I don't know who specifically, but it was tough. I know that.
So what were their concerns?
Well, we weren't in those conversations because um, we are a step outside of that circle, which I'm deeply grateful to be. From what I understand, the concerns were that this was beyond the scope of what this document should promote. And the pushback was, no, absolutely not. This is exactly the space we have to step into right now. I think that was the gist of it. But others who know more should step in.
It's probably a pretty good summary, Patrick. I was yeah, I was just kind of echoing what Sarah said earlier about there being 15, I think it was 15 federal agencies who all have their logos on this. I was scrolling through the authors page and was just shocked by how many people were involved in writing it. Like I just can't imagine how overwhelming it must have been to navigate everyone's thoughts and opinions. So oh yeah, and that's a good point, Katie. A lot of I mean, yeah, even a lot of our groups who are government funded have to be really careful about advocacy, um, doing too much promotion of that. Since, you know, we need to be mindful about where our funding comes from. Um, yeah, that's a really good point.
Well, I guess when would be to me is I'm going. I don't think I'm going to do a whole lot of trying to figure that out. What gets divulged. But it's certainly when we're curious about. Would this be a fair thing that we're looking at the people who were part of the discussions are a subset of the people at the very top, right? Those are the people who are actually sitting in the meetings and doing things. That's one. But each one represents agencies, and every person in there has people above them that are giving them, you'd be wise to go this direction, or our money is saying this, or that kind of thing. And that level is even more not likely we're going to be hearing what that happens. But it's certainly interesting to hear when you know, there are key things like if you get into action, that's propaganda. That's an interesting idea from the department. You know, that I don't think that would be coming from the Department of Defense, because that doesn't make sense for them. That if you believe in taking action, that's outside your bounds. But I think, I mean, actually, I'm going to look up too, is advocacy defined in the glossary? Because that's a question of how do we define what advocacy is. So anyway, there's just some thoughts. If I don't know if we're really going to know all the conversations that happened. And advocacy is not there, just by the way.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that they're steering clear about that. Yeah, civic engagement is a term that a lot of us in CLEAN have adopted to talk about climate action. Civic engagement, I know for a couple of different groups, is a really big part of their work. That's a good point, Sarah.
Sorry if I asked one more thing. Is I'm looking at there's so many ways in which action can be parsed out and looking at things. One is career paths, or saying that students can recognize there's careers in taking climate action, not doing that. And at the risk of kind of maybe going more to the point of thinking, I was looking at what one of the candidates, the one who likes to use orange paint a lot, they were saying about where education should go in general. And there's a strong emphasis on career path development. There's on things along that line. So that's a kind of an interesting one of, all right, we're talking about viable careers. You got a problem with that? I mean, of course there'll be issues, but there's just knowing the question of action and advocacy. There's the thing of knowing that takes many different forms. And I don't think it's tough to argue that students shouldn't be allowed to make money doing good things for society.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I just think before we end this call, I think we are leaders in this work, each and every one of us that have chosen to be here today, whether it was on your own time or we're told to be here today. And we are leaders we have impact in starting at our kitchen tables, and let alone to all the different things that you impact, all the groups that we're all part of. And if we read kind of beyond the work of, the government, we have been hearing a lot of very smart people writing about how we need to shift the narrative and talk about the positive things that are happening with climate solutions, because there's a lot of them. And we need to shift the narrative about a lot of things. I mean, if we look at the Yale climate communications data, some close to 70% of people in the US are concerned about climate change. We need to start conversations. I think last week, Jason in Ohio reminded us to remind people about that. And we, instead of going down these roads of skepticism and where so many people want us to go, that are the loud minority, we have an opportunity to not to go there. we are leaders in this work. And I think the more we can move our whole conversation into this direction, the more we're going to have an impact collectively at a national and local and national level in this important, essential work. So
I just wanted to say something to that, because in the state of Florida, something that has received pretty good feedback is when we address it with the perspective of resilience. And, some folks think, oh, well, we need to think more about climate change and sustainability, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? If that's a doorway that we can start those conversations with, the tough people that we're trying to have conversations with, then let's move forward. It is a way to move forward. And so we're getting more and more positive responses with people when we approach it as a resiliency.
Good point. It's all about framing. Cool. Well, it is the top of the hour, so we should probably end it here, but rest assured that this is the first of many conversations, I'm sure. So thanks everyone for being here and offering your insights. Thanks, Patrick, for all your work on this and for explaining things to us. And we'll see you all next week or at a later date.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.